Well, hey everybody, it's Mr. Schauber again, and welcome to the presentation on the U.S. uniforms, weapons, aircraft, ships in World War II. This is not a comprehensive list, but I tried to get some of the main things, main weapons and aircraft and ships and so forth that the United States used in the Second World War. You're going to see the U.S. once we start our manufacturing and we start our factories just humming, we are pumping out war products and various uh, you know, multi-purpose and just varied war products that we were able to pretty much outdo every other country, and that helps us win the war. So the U.S. was a juggernaut once we turned the factories on, and these are the things they produced. We first have to start out with GIs. This is going to be the nickname for the American troops in World War II, but GI literally stands for government issue. Because the government was providing the soldiers with their boots and their uniform and their gun and their guns and bullets and food and everything had a GI stamp on it. Okay, government issue. The government gave it to you, and so the U.S. troop, the average U.S. soldier in World War II, got the nickname GI. So the GIs are going here, they're going there, they're doing this, they're doing that. And of course, GI Joe, the action figure, is based on that as well. So that is how that's what the GI means. That's what American soldiers were nicknamed, and just so you understand that. Something else we got to talk about real quick is the diversity of the American troops in World War II, and it wasn't just white Americans who fought in World War II. Of course, that was the majority of our military, and the military was segregated. But we had a lot of Mexican Americans that volunteered and fought in the armed forces. We had Native Americans, and their job was very dangerous because they were oftentimes, and there weren't very many of them, but they were put in, oftentimes in the front lines, especially over in the Pacific. And the most famous Native American group were the Navajo, because what was happening was the Japanese were cracking our codes in the Pacific at first, and we couldn't let that happen. And so we figured out the Navajo Indians could just speak their language, their Navajo language, and the Japanese could not understand it, and they couldn't crack it. They couldn't figure it out. And so the Navajo became essential, indispensable in the Pacific, especially being able to keep our codes from being broken by the Japanese, and this helps us beat the Japanese and win the war in the Pacific. So this is amazing, right? The Japanese Americans who signed up for the war, now their job is very dangerous as well, especially if they're in the Pacific, because if you're in the heat of battle or it's dark and you don't know, you see a Japanese looking guy, you could shoot him. Well, he might be your own guy. And so, but these are Japanese Americans. These are guys who are descendants of Japanese immigrants. Many of these Japanese Americans spoke Japanese. Many of them did not as well. They've been raised in the U.S. They were loyal to the U.S. And so very dangerous job. Very brave soldiers doing what they did. The women, the American women. The U.S. doesn't win the war if it's not for the effort at home by people working in the factories, many of whom were the wives and mothers and sisters and so forth of the men who were fighting. The women were the ones that were building the ships and building so much of what we were using. And so the American women who went to work in mass really helped us win the war. And then African Americans. You had over 1 million African Americans who will join the military in all services. Like I said, the military was still segregated, but you had entire groups of African Americans, units that fought. Many times the African Americans were stewards mates uh, and they were cooks, or they were did some of the menial labor as well. But they oftentimes were asked to fight and be on the front lines just like everybody else, and they proved to be amazing in battle. So if not for a full team effort, if you will, from everybody, we don't win the war. So it took everybody to make this a victory for the United States and for the Allies in World War II. All right. Uh, in general, here's what some of the U.S. military uniforms looked like. Obviously, it depended on what part of the world you were in. If you were in North Africa, or parts of Europe, or in Asia, but or in the Pacific, but and different, Army, Navy, um, and so forth. But back then, they didn't have the Air Force as a separate branch of military. It was part of the Army. So the Army Air Force is what they called it, and so those were together. But anyway, yeah, you could see kind of depending on where you were and what your job was, that was what your uniform looked like. Now, some of the weapons. The standard handgun for American troops in World War II was the Colt M1911. Okay, this is what they used. Now, obviously, if you were a soldier in battle, you'd have a handgun as well as usually one or two other weapons, right? But um, the Colt was the standard handgun, still around. The Tommy gun, a favorite of gangsters in the 1930s and a favorite of soldiers in World War II. The Tommy was the Thompson submachine gun. And you can see your magazine there coming down, but the Tommy was devastating, especially in close combat, and just for its rapid fire abilities, and it's small, relatively lightweight, easy to handle, and so your Thompson machine gun was definitely a favorite for a lot of American troops. The M3 submachine gun as well, and you can see the type of shells it used. But the submachine gun, again, small, compact, but it's a machine gun, right? I mean, basically it's hold down the trigger and you fire as long as you have the bullets. But you can go through a magazine full of ammunition real quick, right? When you have a submachine gun like that. But again, for close contact, for in the heat of the battle, right? And when things are nearby. I mean, obviously you're not going to be using this for long range accuracy. It's going to be close contact, but it's extremely effective. Now, for the stuff that's a little more long range, you wanted your rifles. And the M1903 Springfield was a favorite. You could add a scope to it, make it a sniper rifle, but the Springfield rifle, very accurate, effective, uh, one of the preferred rifles for our World War II troops. But yeah, this is long. This is more long range, right? He also had your M1 Garand rifle, okay, and this was very popular as well. And again, more long range rifles are the handguns are the close range. The submachine guns, the machine guns are a little more close range. The rifles are going to be long range. And then something that the American troops had that was a devastating weapon and feared by the enemy were the shotguns. The shotguns, of course, are used for close range as well, but they are unbelievably powerful. And why a shotgun is so effective is when it fires a shell, it basically is shooting a bunch of BBs out. Is what happens. You don't have to be completely accurate with the shotgun. You can fire a shot, and that shell is going to open up, and the BBs are all going to come flying out of it, and so they spray and they hit a big, you can blow a hole through a wall with a rifle or even a handgun, but the hole's only going to be about the size of the bullet. With a shotgun, you can blow a hole through a wall. One shot could blow a hole the size of a softball, or or bigger, right? Depending on how close you are to the wall. So, I mean, the shotguns were extremely, extremely useful in close contact. So you had your Browning, your Remington, also your Winchester shotgun. I mean, all of these are just going to be wow. They pack a punch, no doubt about it, and they're going to scare the enemy to death. Okay, but yeah, anybody that's ever shot a shotgun before knows what kind of power they pack, and they're amazing. And then you have the grenade launcher. You could attach a grenade launcher to your rifle and then attach a grenade to the launcher and you could launch grenades, okay, and shoot them long range and fairly long range and have them blow up and, you know, and all the shrapnel goes flying everywhere and think of the damage that would do. So the grenade launcher is something else the Americans will use very effectively. And then, of course, here are your standard grenades, your MK2 grenades. Uh, they're fairly heavy. When you pull the pin out, you have a limited amount of time. Then you toss the grenade. And these are obviously for close contact as well to the enemy. And you try to toss it to where the enemy was, and it would blow up, and you would have tons of sharp, jagged pieces of metal, little shrapnel pieces, flying everywhere. And they do massive damage, right? And the flamethrower. Oh my goodness. The flamethrower is going to be just devastating. It's going to be, you're going to shoot flames, okay? Light everything on fire. And if the enemy's close enough, sometimes they were the victims of the flamethrower directly, okay? Oftentimes you use the flamethrower to uh, use it in a concrete blockhouse or in a bunker or something like that, and it would kind of suck all the oxygen out, right? And it'd force the enemy out or it'd kill them. But you could also use it on the brush and the, you know, especially in the Pacific, use it in the jungle to burn away the brush. But I mean, yeah, it was used directly on the enemy at times too. So the flamethrower was, as you can imagine, a powerful weapon. And then you get into your machine guns, the Browning machine gun. Uh, Obviously, we weren't the only ones to have the machine gun, but it took two guys usually to operate, one guy to maneuver the belt of ammunition, and one guy to control the gun. But a machine gun, when you're shooting, I mean, hundreds and thousands of rounds in a short amount of time, uh, what a devastating, annihilating weapon this is. Of course, the machine gun, the prototype to it had been used in World War I, but by World War II, it's much more impactful and much more dangerous and deadly than it was in World War I, right? So you can imagine a machine gun, and of course you'd use this for the enemy approaching at you, and I mean, oh, they didn't have a chance. The bar gun, the Browning automatic rifle, is going to be an awesome weapon as well. Shoot more long range, but you're shooting more ammunition, more rounds in a shorter amount of time. The bar gun is going to be one of the favorites, especially when you can put on that little tripod, and if you could get down and just um, lock in on an enemy and go after him that way. It was it was awesome. Now, real quick, let's look at our tanks. The M4 Sherman uh, tank was our smaller tank and definitely used a lot in the Pacific. It's going to be used in Europe as well, obviously. But you can see the little shorter barrel. It's going to be very powerful, though. Not probably as good as the German tanks were. Our technology in tanks was not as good yet, but we would get there. But our Sherman tank is going to be one of our preferred. It's our lighter tank, faster, if you will, and still has a lot of firepower. And then the heavy tank was the M26 Pershing. And you can see the long gun on this, and the long range ability to fire, long, huge distances, and I mean, just, shake the ground when this thing is rolling over it, and then especially when it fires its gun. So, but yeah, between the Sherman and the Pershing, these were our tanks in World War II, and you did not want to see a tank coming at you, no matter who you were. And then we add the M18 HELLCAT to that as well. It's kind of an in-between version of the Sherman and the Pershing, 76 millimeter cannon, and the big guns on top you could command. A guy could come out and command those machine guns on top, and oh man, devastating, right? So yeah, between the Sherman, the Pershing, and the HELLCAT, we were well equipped tank-wise in World War II. Your howitzers, the M101 howitzer with a 105 millimeter shell is more of a stationary. I mean, you can move it, obviously. You can pick it up and move it on wheels. It takes at least a couple guys to move, right? But this is going to be a big gun for anti-tank, especially, and anti-enemy in general, right? You can see the shells that are going into that thing are huge. They're like little rockets coming at you, right? But yeah, the howitzer was an important weapon for us, no doubt. And then the 16-inch 50 caliber M1919 gun. Look at the size of this thing. Now this is stationary; it's not going anywhere. You would plant these. These are especially useful. You can plant them on near the coasts and protect your coastlines with this. But look at the size of that gun. I don't know what the exact range on that thing would be, but it is enormous. I mean, huge. So you can imagine the size of shell that's launching out and the damage that could do. But yeah, these M1919s were, you didn't want to be in the way of that. Crazy. We also use the M3 37 millimeter anti-tank gun, okay, which is kind of like your howitzer, but a little more mobile maybe. But yeah, you'd use this as an anti-tank. You know, a little shiftier, like I said, a little more mobile. You could get it around places a little faster to go after the tanks. But of course, I mean, you got to be stealthy because if a tank locks in on you and shoots its cannon at you, you're going to be done for. So the anti-tank, you were hoping to get it in a concealed spot where it could knock out an enemy tank without being knocked out itself. And of course, the M1 bazooka is your rocket launcher. It shot 60 millimeter rockets. You can see the size of those down in the bottom right, and the size of the bazooka. So the Germans had their Panzerschreck, which was basically their bazooka, and so then we had our M1 bazooka. And you'd use this on tanks. You'd use it on to flush out an enemy out of a building. Use it on the enemy themselves. Okay, but quite a kick these bazookas pack, and yeah, pretty amazing stuff. Pretty crazy the kinds of things we come up with for war, right? It's amazing and awe-inspiring the technology that they can use, but it's also scary to think about. I mean, those are being used on people. So it's a double-edged sword, no doubt, when you talk about the advancement of technology. All right, let's look for just a few minutes at our warplanes. The U.S. quickly has to make its warplanes and make them better, and eventually we have to become the world leader in the air. We have to have air superiority, and we eventually will. The Curtiss P-40 WARHAWK is going to be a plane used, very versatile plane used all over the world, from Africa to Europe to Russia to the Pacific. You got to love how the guys would paint their planes and stuff, to make them look a certain way. Pretty cool. But the WARHAWK's going to be a small, quick, versatile plane. The Grumman F4F WILDCAT is going to often be used in the Pacific and take off from aircraft carriers and be used to bomb Japanese aircraft carriers and fight the Japanese planes in the air. So the WILDCAT's going to be an essential plane for our victory in World War II, no doubt about it. The Douglas SBD Dauntless also is going to be used in the Pacific on aircraft carriers, and this is going to be the most effective plane in sinking Japanese aircraft carriers during World War II. So you're definitely, this is going to be super effective, and again, another necessary plane. We used a couple main planes off our aircraft carriers, and these last two we've looked at, but the Dauntless is probably the best. The American plane that shot down more Japanese planes than any other in World War II was the P-38 Lightning. This is a very popular plane to get a model kit of and for people to put together, But the P-38 Lightning, you can see how it was constructed, kind of interesting, kind of a cool look. But yeah, this is going to be man, what a good plane that is. The most built plane during World War II for the United States was the B-24 Liberator. Now it's a little heavier plane, right? We're moving up from your WARHAWK and your P-38 Lightning and so forth. This is going to be used on all fronts in different roles. It's going to be used as a bomber. It's going to be used for reconnaissance, anti-submarine warfare. It's going to be used to transport, goods and materiel and people. So the Liberator is going to be essential as well. All of them are essential. I don't want you to get the idea they're not, but some were just more effective than others and were used more than others. And the Liberators was the most built plane in World War II. You can see over 18,000 of them made. So that was all over the place, no doubt about it. And maybe the most popular plane for Americans in World War II, and even to this day, perhaps the most popular aircraft we used during that era was the P-51 Mustang. One of the best combat planes in the war, helped us achieve supremacy in the skies. The Mustang was awesome, fast, versatile, strong for its size. Yeah, this is also one of those planes that people love to get models of, and they put the kits together and make them. So yeah, the P-51 Mustang is a fan favorite. And here's another picture of the P-51 Mustangs all kind of in a row, off flying together. Pretty cool. And then we get into the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress. This is a heavy plane. This was, I wrote on here, represented American aviation power during the war. It could hold 17,600 pounds of bombs. Okay, heavy plane. The thing about the Germans is they had great quick planes and versatile that way, and the Japanese were pretty good too, but they didn't have the heavy planes that could hold all the bombs, and that's where we get the advantage. And so the B-17 could just devastate the enemy with all the firepower, all the bombs it could hold. It was just amazing. Here's a picture of the Flying Fortress dropping some of those bombs. Can you imagine? Open the hatch and let the bombs fly. You can imagine the damage those would do. And then the Grumman F6F HELLCAT. I wrote on here, dominant aircraft, carrier-based plane, shot down countless enemy planes to help the Allies win the war. Another aircraft carrier plane. Yeah, the WILDCAT, the HELLCAT. I mean, just wow, they were great. These pilots. And I think we look at the planes and we too often overlook the pilots. These guys could really fly. These pilots, especially if you're an aircraft carrier-based pilot, you got to be able to land that thing right, and you got to be able to take off right, or else you're nose diving into the ocean. You're not getting out. Okay, and very dangerous job as well. But these guys were awesome. They were fantastic pilots and amazing. And of course, the B-29 Superfortress. Okay, Boeing made this heavy plane as well. You had your B-17, but then you had your B-29. This could hold 20,000 pounds of bombs. It was this type of plane was used to drop the atomic bombs on Japan that ended World War II. The Enola Gay that Paul Tibbets flew over Hiroshima was a B-29. And if you ever get a chance to be up close and personal with any of these airplanes at museums or bases or things like that, it's cool. It's pretty dang cool. But if you get a chance to be close to a B-29, it is awe-inspiring. It is massive. You just realize, man, how do you get something that big up into the air flying like that? And to be able to hold 20,000 pounds of bombs, it's incredible. So, yeah, this was the big boy used to drop the big payload on the enemy, no doubt about it. Another picture of the B-29 dropping. Look at all those. Can you imagine? All right, for just a few minutes, let's look at some of the ships, some of the most famous ships in World War II. The most famous American battleship sunk during Pearl Harbor was the USS Arizona, and you can see the famous picture of it intact, and then the famous picture of it on the right there at Pearl Harbor. It's going down. 1,102 sailors and Marines sunk to their graves on board this ship. The bulk of the deaths at Pearl Harbor, the majority really, were on board the USS Arizona. And the Japanese just came into the harbor undetected, and they just bombed the heck out of us, and the Arizona got the brunt. So, you know, the famous there's a famous memorial built to it today, which we'll look at in just a second. But yeah, this Arizona is the most famous thing, visual really, from Pearl Harbor. And then here is the memorial built to it in Pearl Harbor today. It was built in 1962, and you can still go see it, and a lot of people do, visited by 2 million people a year. Okay, but these 1,102 sailors and Marines killed on board are still down there, and that USS Arizona still leaks up oil to the surface all these years later. It's a solemn reminder of what happened there in World War II, and it's quite a sight. As you can see, the outline of the ship underneath the memorial. Of course, you have to go out to the memorial by boat. You get on, and you can walk into that big white building, and they have plaques and things in there with the names of the soldiers, or excuse me, the names of the sailors and Marines killed, and you know, they talk about what happened there. So pretty amazing. The USS Missouri battleship was used in the battles of Okinawa and Iwo Jima. It was also the place, though, probably most famously, where Japan officially surrendered to the U.S. at the end of World War II. And I mean, these battleships are amazing, though. And we'll look at one in more detail at the end of this presentation. But man, the guns on those things and just the weight, you know, and the capacity to hold the amount of people and goods and supplies. These are miracles of modern technology and architecture and engineering, and they're incredible. They're amazing. But the USS Missouri was involved in some major battles, key battles in the Pacific, and then this is where Japan officially surrenders at the end of the war. And here's the entire crew of the ship on the USS Missouri. Pretty cool with all the sailors in their uniforms. The U.S. may not have won, especially the war in the Pacific. Well, think about the war in Europe as well, D-Day and so forth. Who knows if we would have won the war if not for this boat, the Higgins boat. We made a bunch of these because what happens is you're on these big destroyers or on these battleships being transported toward an island or toward land, and these ships are so big they can't get very close to the beach. They can't get close to the shore. So you'd have to bail out, you know, who knows how far out to sea and try to swim with your 100-pound backpack on. I mean, it's not going to happen. So what would happen is these battleships would get out to sea, and then as they were approaching the land, they would drop these drop these Higgins boats, these smaller boats, and then put 30 or 40 troops in each one of them, and these Higgins boats would then take the soldiers right up to the shore, ideally. Now, at times, of course, you had to bail out sooner than later in the water if your boat got hit or, you know, if something happened. But ideally, these boats would take the soldiers right up onto the shore, and their ramp would drop, and the soldiers could just run right up onto the beach. And you know, I wrote on here, this is an invaluable boat for landing troops close to the beaches to assault the enemy. This boat has been called the boat that won the war. I mean, that's how valuable it was. So, I mean, yeah, without this, who knows what would have happened? But you know, these boats could take these soldiers as close to the beach or right up onto the beach, and you know, what an advantage that is, right? You're not a sitting duck out in the water trying to swim to shore if you're on one of these boats. So, pretty awesome. All right, now a submarine, famous U.S. submarine in World War II, the USS BOEING. You can go see this in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. It's open to tours right next to the USS Arizona, uh, and man, these submarines are amazing too. We had to catch up in submarine technology, because the Germans were so good and they were sinking so many ships in World War One and World War Two. So we had to catch up, and then we got up there, and our submarine technology became second to none. But yeah, so the USS Bowfin is a famous submarine, very effective in World War II. And let's look at a couple aircraft carriers. Aircraft carriers, obviously, uh, their job is to hold a bunch of sailors and airmen, and their job is to be out in the ocean to launch airplanes off their runway and go find enemy airplanes and enemy aircraft carriers and ships and sink them. And these aircraft carriers are another miracle of modern engineering and architecture, technology. They're like floating cities. They can hold 3,000 men or more, and all their supplies and all their stuff, and that's where these guys live. These guys live on these boats out in the ocean. If you ever get a chance to tour an aircraft carrier, take advantage of it. They are amazing. There's so much to see. They're so huge, and there's so much inside them to see, down underneath, the runway. So this USS Enterprise is called the Gray Ghost, one of only 3 American aircraft carriers commissioned before World War II to survive the war. The aircraft carrier casualty rate was pretty high, right? Um, this USS Enterprise participated in more major actions of the war against Japan than any other U.S. ship. It was involved in Pearl Harbor, Battle of Midway, Guadalcanal, Philippine Sea, Leyte Gulf, and others. It's the most decorated ship of World War II, for the U.S. So pretty awesome. There's a picture of the Enterprise and an airplane flying over. So yeah, you took off from these aircraft carriers, and you tried to come back and land if you were the pilot on these aircraft carriers. And wow, they are awesome. The USS Hornet is the one that launched the Doolittle raid on Tokyo in the early part of the war to kind of give America a boost. Okay, it also was in the Battle of Midway, which was the turning point of the war in the Pacific. It was in the Battle of Guadalcanal, which was a bloody, nasty battle. Okay, in the Pacific. It was hit and sunk at the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands, and it's the last U.S. fleet carrier sunk by enemy fire in World War II. So the USS Hornet, didn't live to tell the tale of the war, but it was a great soldier during the war, right? It was involved in a lot of important battles and was very effective. Here's another picture of the Hornet. You can just see how long these runways are. They're awesome. Um, yeah, just amazing. Now, the USS Indianapolis was a battleship involved in a lot of operations in the Pacific. It delivered parts of the first atomic bomb, known as Little Boy, to the U.S. military base in Tinian in the Pacific before it got loaded on to Paul Tibbets' airplane, the B-29 airplane, to be taken over Hiroshima. Um, this is a fascinating story. They need to make a full-length modern movie about this because of what has happened. But it's a fascinating story, this Indianapolis. Um, it was on its way back from Tinian, delivering parts for the atomic bomb. And it was told, the crew on board was told that the coast was clear, that there were no Japanese submarines, or there was nothing, nothing out there. It was fine to be sailing, and it wasn't fine. This boat got torpedoed by a Japanese sub while going to the Philippines, and it sunk in 12 minutes. A ship that big to sink in 12 minutes, that is incredible. So you can imagine how fast it's going down, and of course the devastation that occurred. Most guys didn't have time to get off the boat, but of the 1,200 crew on board, 300 went down with the ship right away. Of the remaining 900, all of them now, all these 900 guys are going to be out in the ocean, treading water, swimming, trying to stave off dehydration. It's not like they're going to be out there for 5 minutes. These guys are out there for days. In fact, the ones who survived were spotted after after 4 days of being out there. So you're treading water, the water's cold, your dehydration sets in, you got to drink something, but you try to drink salt water, it makes you more dehydrated, it's saltwater poisoning, and then you got shark attacks because guys start dying and sharks show up. And there's only a few lifeboats, almost no food and water for these 900 guys. And like I said, of the 900 that are out there trying to survive, almost 600 of them will die. But after 4 days, there's only 317 of them left. And they're spotted just by chance by an American plane flying overhead. And so on August 19th, 2017, okay, after years and years of looking for the USS Indianapolis, trying to figure out where it sunk, in the Philippine Sea, where could this thing be, and what's left of it, what's still on board, all this stuff. 300 guys went down with the ship. On August 19th, 2017, a search crew finally found the wreckage of the USS Indianapolis. It was down in the Philippine Sea at about 18,000 feet below the surface. Can you imagine that? But of these 317 guys survived those 4 harrowing days during World War II after their ship had been sunk. And they were so dehydrated. A lot of them lost 50 or 60 pounds in 4 days. They tried to. The guys that rescued them tried to feed them something or give them just little teaspoons of water because their stomachs were so shrunk. And I mean, some of the guys ended up, dying after the fact, after they were rescued because they couldn't handle the food or water. But most of them, they nursed back to health, and a lot of them lived long, productive lives. But can you imagine having gone through that? So, like I said, they should make a full-length, modern-day, up-to-date movie about the whole thing. Delivering the atomic bomb parts to Tinian, and then getting torpedoed and sunk, and the resulting chaos and the rescue, and then finally in 2017 they found the ship. I mean, how cool of a movie would that be? So anyway, but that is the story of the USS Indianapolis. And the USS Iowa. A U.S. battleship, was in both the Atlantic and the Pacific. This is the one that carried Franklin D. Roosevelt across the Atlantic for a meeting he had with Churchill and Stalin in the Middle East. Okay, this was also in action in a handful of battles in the Pacific, an invaluable ship helping us to victory in World War II. This USS Iowa was amazing. I want to show you guys this a little more in depth though right now. I want to show you the guns, because you look at the guns on the big guns on these things, the big cannons. And let me show you what these really look like and the damage they can really do. So these battleships are unbelievable. They're amazing, right? The firepower they possess. I mean, you can't be anywhere near these things without getting obliterated. So let me show you more in detail right here. Yeah, so to finish up this presentation, the USS Iowa gun turrets. Now these are 16-inch guns, which means the bullet, okay, the shell that comes out of these things is 16 inches across. 16 inches, okay, across. Each gun, there's 6 guns right here, you can see. Each gun weighs about 240,000 pounds, almost 250,000 pounds. So for 6 guns, that's almost 1.5 million pounds right there. Just the guns. Just the guns, not the rest of the ship, not all the other stuff on board, not all the people, okay? So each gun, and these are not rapid fire machine guns, they could only fire about 1.5 rounds a minute. So basically, for every 2 minutes, they could fire 3 shots out of each gun. But the projectiles, the bullets they fired, weighed around 2,000 pounds each. So you had a 2,000-pound bullet, okay, flying through the air, and they traveled at about a half a mile per second. A half a mile per second. And how far could they shoot? They could shoot almost 20 miles. So you could be almost 20 miles off the shore that the enemy was on. You could fire 3 shots every 2 minutes at this enemy, each bullet weighing 2,000 pounds, going a half a mile a second. Okay, so it would take about 40 seconds to go almost 20 miles, but a 2,000-pound, basically rocket missile, okay, type thing coming at you, 16 inches across, okay, and I mean, can you imagine the devastation, the damage that these things would do? This is beyond amazing. So, and these are the type of guns that all these battleships have. So, oh my goodness, when you start putting it in these terms, you start to get an idea of just the utter annihilation that would occur as a result of these. But yeah, this is the kind of technology we're using in World War II. Now, of course, we have technology that's even more advanced today, but this is the kind of stuff we're using on the Germans, on the Italians, on the Japanese in World War II to try to take islands and take beaches. And I mean, wow, if you put it in these terms, it comes to life a little more. But yeah, these battleships, these aircraft carriers, these submarines, our aircraft, just all incredible. The weapons we use in World War II, American ingenuity, technology, and hard work. That's what lead us to victory in this war, and it's pretty incredible when you think about it.